I'm Jeremy Shepherd.
And I'm Damien.
We use data to expose deceitful property experts and their marketing BS. This is the Expert Busting series.
Welcome to episode 23 of the Expert Busting series, Saving for a Deposit. Take it away, Jez.
Yeah, so this episode is more geared towards people who are starting out with property investing or possibly feel like they've been locked out of the market.
So step one, control your cash flow.
Yeah, so you need to create a budget first. You need to make sure you are living well within your means so you can put some of that money aside. But that money is not for a deposit. That money is to be invested, which is step two.
Step two, so learn investing before property.
Yeah, so the second step in the process of heading towards being a property investor is to learn everything you can about share investing. That's right, shares, not property. Funny to come from someone who's pro-property. But if you don't have the sufficient funds to buy a property, putting it in the bank will slow progress down. So you could instead start off investing in shares. Shares require a lot less money to get started. And you can step up to property once you've got a deposit saved. So, not saved, but invested. This is the whole point. So the one thing you need to learn about share investing is preservation of capital. You can't lose that money. The share market is quite volatile, goes up and down a lot. The key thing is not to lose that money. And the share market will teach you all about volatility, about sentiment. It'll teach you about risk. But just remember, your primary goal is not to lose that money. You don't want to go backwards. Go on, Damien.
Have you heard this in the industry, save for a deposit? Is that what you've heard a lot?
Yeah. They're just saving. So it just goes into a bank account and just sits there. And that's a slower way of it building.
Because I will be discussing more at the back end of this Expert Busting series because working with many clients, I see different approaches that you can take, but let's move on. Step three, learn property while you wait. So what's this about? Shares versus property.
Yeah, so while that portfolio of shares is growing, then you can learn everything you can about property investing. And the first thing to learn is marketing. So not how negative gearing works, finance, growth drivers, it's marketing. And why? Because you need to know the weapons that the marketing magicians are going to use to lure you in. How do you know whose advice to take? If you're trying to learn about property investing, how do you know whose advice to consume? So there's a couple of things to tip you off about fake experts. Is the expert full of opinion or full of research, full of facts? Have they spoken about any of the expert busting topics? So look at other episodes in this series. The series has as many episodes as it has for a good reason. There are an enormous number of fake experts out there that are just propagating nonsense. So you could examine some of the topics here and see if they have spoken about those topics. Do they sound overly confident? Because that's another one of their tricks. Do they show impressive gains perhaps from their clients, and these have been cherry-picked, the best of the best, and forget the rest? They might show very impressive averages or medians or spectacular return on investment, which could be embellished or could be cherry-picked. Are they trying to get you to visualise what life could be like if you engage their services or buy their product? So what they're doing there is they're selling the dream. I remember years ago, Damo, you asked me, hey, Jez, how do I make $1 million? Do you remember asking me that? And I said...
How long ago was that?
It's like...
2017, 2018?
Yeah, around then. Jez, how do I make $1 million? And I said, sell hope. And then you backed it up with, I need to make it really fast. And I said, sell false hope. That's what these marketing magicians will do. They are basically trying to sell you hope. There's a lot of people that are lured into the wealth creation industry. Property investing is part of wealth creation industry. Some people are very desperate to change their financial situation. They have a dream in mind, and that desperation makes you vulnerable to the marketing of these these sorts of people. So try and recognize when you're about to be manipulated emotionally. The more excited you get about what they're saying, the more likely you have fell for their marketing tricks. So what you want to do instead is seek out the boring processes, the technical details. How do you go about it? Focus on the process. Don't focus too much on the end game, and that excitement won't make you so vulnerable. So yeah, property investing, it's not easy, but it does have a few advantages over share investing that make it the next step in your investment career. So following are some brief points on the differences between shares and properties, but you look like you want to challenge me about something.
No, I think the hardest thing for investors and when you're sort of starting out is how do you learn the basics? Because there's so much noise out there. Is it YouTube? Is it these forums? Is it ChatGPT? Is it Google? Like what I've learned is obviously from experience, like going through the shares and property, but it's just for someone starting out, look, set and forget approach I believe one of the best approaches, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on. But I just think just see who you gravitate to. So listen to these podcasts and don't trust everything that you hear. Do your due diligence, do your research, and work out what your price point is that you're targeting and go for that goal.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, where do you go to learn that stuff? And I don't think it's so much the medium. Like it could be a book, it could be a course, it could be lots of YouTube or even snippets on Facebook. I don't know what the kids are watching nowadays, but I think what's important is not the medium so much as you can see some telltale signs of the spruikers. They are really pumping things up. They are trying to get you excited about things. They're trying to manipulate you emotionally. What you probably want is something that's black and white, a definition from Google as what negative gearing is. And then you might have some questions and you just keep asking or ChatGPT or whatever your AI agent is, but just steer clear of the marketing-heavy websites.
Yeah, I think they play on that sort of fear, don't they, in their marketing?
Fear and greed.
Yes,
yeah.
Sign up now. Follow me, you'll make millions of dollars, do my course. And the challenge with this course is made up, really. It's their course. And has anyone actually gone through these courses go, I disagree with this. So yeah, it's interesting. You see all these courses popping up everywhere
and
now.
Another thing to watch out for is, I've got 50 investment properties. I'll teach you everything that I know. What they know is how to market themselves as an expert. I can guarantee you they did not acquire 50 investment properties from ridiculously good property investing. They'll do maybe some good property investing, but they made their fortune from their business, not from their portfolio.
Moving on,
James.
Yeah. So I think the next one is leverage changes outcomes.
Yeah, so this is one of the big benefits of property over shares is the leverage, the degree of leverage. So you can invest in property with a higher loan-to-value ratio than you can invest in shares. An 80% loan-to-value ratio is pretty much bog standard for a property investor, but the LVRs for shares, 90% is impossible, I would believe. Is that right? Yeah, so the return on investment can nearly double when you go from an 80% LVR to a 90% LVR simply because you've got half the deposit invested. But yeah, try and do that in the share market. You'll really struggle. So that means, with a 80% LVR, you've got a 20% deposit. So you have invested roughly 20% of the value of the property. So if it's a $500,000 property, that's $100,000 of your dollars that's invested. Now, if it goes up by 20%, you've doubled your money, which could happen in, say, 2 years of double-digit growth. Whereas with shares, you generally have much lower LVR. That's for a margin loan. It's called a margin loan. And you can get a margin call, which means if the share price drops a little bit, you may have to sell some of your shares at just the wrong time to lower that loan-to-value ratio. And you won't get a high loan-to-value ratio like 80% unless it's the absolute bluest of the blue chip stock or index funds, things like that.
Yeah, it's been a while. I'd have to go back and look at those index funds. But if you go back to episode 36, 37 and 38 of our of our podcast, we go through different scenarios. And look, I think those index funds were quite powerful, especially when they were sort of leveraged too. So look, there's pros and cons to it all. So yeah, I think that the main thing is for me around, I guess, shares, I would sort of think of it as that, like if you're saving cash, you don't have that volatility. So you've got that eye on the prize on buying a property at a $500,000 price point as an example. You put everything to the side, you focus on your cash flows, and the goal is to get that deposit, and you have it maybe in a high interest savings account, 3, 4, 5%, which isn't even that great, which you got to pay tax on. But you don't have the volatility where GFC might hit or a COVID might hit, and you might lose 20 to 30% of your deposit. So I'll talk more about it at the back end of the this expert busting episode. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that I'm not opposed to having it as cash and not touching the share market.
All right. Another benefit, next slide, is control. So you have more control over your asset if it's a property. And we're comparing property to shares again. So you can make decisions to improve cash flow or improve value, and you answer to nobody. Whereas you contrast that with shares, the best you could do is vote at an annual general meeting, and that's even if you knew how to run the company better than the CEO. Yeah, so control is a big one for property.
And I think with the shares, one thing you can control is the price point's a lot lower. So you can invest in shares with hundreds of dollars or index funds as an example, and you can easily diversify quickly. You might buy index funds from overseas or in Australia, where with property, you're heavily leveraged into one asset. So if that asset doesn't grow, it can really hold you back. So that's mostly the big negative for property.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so we've got some comparisons of shares versus property just quickly now.
Won't go into it too much, but
yeah, so control we mentioned. With shares, you've got virtually none. With property, it's all yours. You can add value. You could extend. You could renovate. You could subdivide. You could knock down and rebuild. You can improve cash flow by renting it out, perhaps fully furnished, maybe via Airbnb for short stay accommodation. Yeah.
I think the other thing with property, the control side of things is, at the end of the day, you do it yourself or you utilize a buyer's agency service, you're the one that signs the contract at the end of the day. So you're actually picking where that property is, where with shares, it's obviously diversified in all the companies that are out there. So you've got control over that, but also, as you mentioned, you can do renovations, extensions, maybe granny flat for a bit of extra rental income, Airbnb, you can rent a room out, you can do joint ventures. So there's a lot of options where you own it and you've got control of it. But like I said, the only thing is that if that property doesn't perform, which I think we have both been in that situation early on in our property investing careers, where you purchase a property and it doesn't move for years.
Yeah.
And we know the pain.
It hurts, yeah. Especially when you're seeing the rest of the market just boom.
That hurts even more. Yeah. So beating the benchmark.
Yeah, and this is one of the biggest benefits of property over shares. It's not that hard to beat the average in property, whereas the dominant players in the share market are the fund managers. They move many millions of dollars around in a single transaction. And in the share market, every share owner is an investor, whereas in property, you could be purchasing from someone who just wants to downgrade or upgrade, or they're moving interstate. So, the dominant player is the owner-occupier, and you're up against someone who is not as educated as you in the property market. Well, we hope is not as educated as you, but in the share market, someone is selling what you're buying. Who's right? Are they right or are you right? Whereas in property, it might not be the case of right or wrong. It's a lifestyle decision, and you're capitalising as a property investor on that lifestyle decision. So how easy is it to beat the benchmark? The benchmark for the share market might be the ASX 200 or the All Ords. Not very easy for a mug punter, but outperforming the national average growth rate of real estate, it's pretty easy for an investor, especially with the right sort of research tools. In fact, the top markets picked by the demand to supply ratio has shown historically to outperform the national growth rate by double. That's over the next 3 years, not long term, by double. Whereas trying to, some of these fund managers, they struggle to actually beat the benchmark, let alone by a significant portion. And I've seen super fund managers bragging about like a 10% return over the last 10 years, which is pretty ordinary compared to property investing.
Is that the DSR3 at the time of recording? Is it the DSR3 that's outperformed it over
Well, yes. I think when I was, what did I say there? Double? Yeah, that would be the DSR3.
So if the national growth rate was, let's say, 5% over that 3 years, it'd be around 10% per year.
Yeah. And this is like, say, the top 100.
Top 100.
Yeah. But that's just suburbs. So basically what I'm saying there is grab the top 100 by DSR at a particular month, go eeny, meeny, miny, mo, I'm going to buy in that suburb. And then when you look in that suburb for all the properties for sale, go eeny, meeny, miny, mo, pick a property, and then 3 years later you would have had typically double the national growth rate.
So in that top 100, for example, are there ones that have gone negative or haven't performed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, very few negative, but some of them might not have had 5%. They might have had, say, 4% per annum growth.
So out of that top 100, like, again, I'm not sure if you know off the top of your head, what would be the percentage of wins versus losses or outperformance versus?
Yeah, typically
More than
I
50%?
Oh, yeah, like closer to 85%,
That's
I think.
a good success
like
rate.
That. Yeah.
All right. And then I think you mentioned that the fund managers, I think a lot of them fail to beat the index with all their costs factored in. So I know a lot of investors and what are they called? Finfluencers or whatever they are. Yeah, they obviously push those index funds. And look, I'm not opposed to it because they're cheap fees. You spread across the whole market.
Stable. Yeah, good spread. Yeah. So remember, number one goal, if you are going to invest in shares to save for a deposit, you should preserve equity. Don't lose your money. And index funds are good for that. Oh, yeah. So this is another difference. Risk. Volatility is considered risk. So clearly, therefore, property is of a lower risk than shares because shares do bounce up and down throughout the day, whereas property might bounce up and down for a particular suburb from month to month. So far less volatile, therefore far less risky, and this is reflected in the loan-to-value ratios. The reason why it's so easy to get a 90% LVR for property is because the banks consider property to be lower risk than shares. Liquidity, that's another big one, in favour of shares though, not in favour of property. You can sell some shares in minutes, whereas property is going to take at least a month. That would be an absolute fire sale. It can take a month after a contract has been signed just for settlement to take place before money's back in your account, whereas it's minutes for shares.
I think you don't make those rash decisions with property, right? Like with the share market, you hear doom and gloom and it's so easy just to sell out of it because you heard some bad news. But with property, it's just sort of like forget about it, let it do its thing.
Yeah, another plus for shares is the regulation. Financial planners need qualifications, so the advice that you're going to get from an advisor to buy shares is regulated, whereas there's none of that for property investing. And although there are like courses you can do, very few of them are really focused on the most important thing to property investors, which is capital growth. Like to get a buyer's agent's license, there's no teaching in any of the courses about how to find growth markets, is there?
Nothing.
Yeah. So the one thing investors want is performance, and they don't teach it.
Yeah, it's something they definitely need to look into. It's capital growth is the fact that I buy that property and after 3 years, how has it performed?
Yeah.
Barriers to entry.
Yeah, well, that's a huge one for property, isn't it? So shares you can get in for less than $1,000, but you try get into property for less than say $50,000, and you're really going to struggle. So that's one of the big problems, and that is the reason why you need to get that deposit as quickly as possible to get into real estate. And that's why I'm suggesting, rather than just put your money aside, if your surplus cash flow isn't that great, you need to have that money working for you as hard as possible.
Yeah, a bit more risk associated with that, but potentially getting into that market a lot quicker. But I think, that's the big one, right? The difficulty. And it can just, as an investor, don't let it deter you, because you might have, let's say, 5,000 in the bank, or 10,000, 100,000 might seem very far away, but just slowly keep building it up, building up that cash balance, and work towards that goal of purchasing your first property. And I've seen a lot of clients and plans. One good investment plus your super, you're ahead of a lot of Australians out there. Just having one decent investment property, or even your owner occupier, you're ahead.
Yeah.
The ROI reality, leverage changes the maths.
Yeah, so ROI is short for return on investment. If you put $10,000 in the bank and you get 2% interest for that, then the return on your investment before tax is 2%. Not all that attractive. And after tax, it'd be even less than that. 2% might be pretty poor.
What's that, $200, and then after that, it might be like, what, $100 and something dollars? Not that great.
$120 something, yeah. So at the end of the day, the usual decider of a good investment is, well, there's two things, risk and return, this return on investment. So let's see what a bog standard investment property is likely to deliver. All right, so a bit in this infographic, I've calculated a conservative long-term return on investment of around about 16%. And this is for the eeny, meeny, miny, mo style of property investing. And that is a fair whack higher than what most public super funds brag about. Let me go through these calcs. Okay, so we'll start with the box in the top left, labelled investment. Assume you'll have a mortgage with an 80% loan-to-value ratio. Now, you can do better with 85%, 90%, but we'll stick with bog standard because this is pretty easy to get. That means you need to come up with a 20% deposit, but that is not the only money you have to come up with. You also need to pay for stamp duty, legal fees, building and pest inspections, that sort of, those entry costs. So they add up to about another 5% of the property's value. So your total investment is 25% of the property's value, 20% deposit, 5% stamp duty and those other entry costs. All right, now let's go over to the box in the top right labelled income. Now, getting a 4% yield may seem tricky in some of Sydney's and Melbourne's pricier suburbs, but the average nationally is actually about 4%. So this is not an unreasonable estimate. Now let's look at the box called expenses. It's a little bit confusing here, sorry. Right now you're probably paying around 5% of the property's value in mortgage interest. Your rate might be around, say, 6%, but your loan-to-value ratio, remember, that's 80%. So what I'm doing is calculating 80% of a 6% mortgage interest to give 5% that you're paying in interest as a percentage of the property. A little bit confusing there, but all of these numbers are as a percentage of the property rather than looking at all the different types of properties that you could purchase. And, of course, there are other costs such as management fees, repairs and maintenance, insurance. Your property could be vacant every now and then, council rates. So these add up to a little less than 2% of the price of the property. I've rounded it up to 2%. Now, you add that 2% to the interest that you're paying of 5% of the property's value, and your expenses are around about 7% of the property's value. Notice that the income box had 4%, while the expenses box has 7%, so the net holding cost would be minus 3%. It's a little less than that after taking into consideration tax, because you can claim these losses. So because there is a net loss, that reduces your taxable income, and it's not as bad as it sounds. But I've left out that benefit from this summary for simplicity reasons. I'll compensate for it slightly in the next box below, which is growth. So the long-term national growth rate is somewhere between 6 and 7%. I've rounded it up to 7% to balance out the tax simplification in the expenses box. All right, let's bring all this together now into the final box in the bottom left called return on investment. So we receive 4% of the property's value in rent. We lose 7% of its value in expenses, but we gain 7% in capital growth. That gives us a net gain in wealth of 4% after considering income, expenses, and growth. Now, to calculate that as an ROI, a return on investment, we divide by our investment, which was 25% of the property's value. So 4 into 25 is 16%. So that means you have a return on investment of 16%. And that is a lot higher than money in the bank, which might be like 2 or 3%. It's comfortably higher than most of the brags of the super fund managers you see on those poor commercials. And remember, these are estimates based on bog standard averages over the long term. So bog standard LVR, bog standard yield, bog standard interest rate, bog standard expenses, bog standard capital growth. So it is the base level, bog standard, long-term property investing, and you can improve on this. And the next slide gives some of the reasons or the ways in which you can improve on it. So you can improve on it dramatically with a higher LVR. You can seek out better growth markets, better yield markets, or simply better yielding properties within the same market. So it could be a 4% gross yielding suburb, but you buy a property that has a gross rental yield of 4.5%. You can add an extra bedroom. You can build a deck out the back. You can add a granny flat. You can renovate to add value or to increase the rent. And depending on the location, you might be able to improve the rental income using short stay accommodation like Airbnb. Or you can hunt down lenders for better interest rate deals. So all of these can improve that base level return on investment of 16%.
Yeah, when you're shortlisting your properties, let's say you focus on your suburb or several suburbs, and the yield one's an interesting one. Let's say the suburb has an average yield of 4.2% as an example. You might have a look at maybe the cheaper properties that have sold within that market, and then maybe their yield's a little bit higher potentially. So it's good to always assess, like, if the higher price point that you go within the suburb, is it really impacting the yield a lot more? Again, that's just a part of the research phase that you need to really look at. But
yeah, but the first thing, of course, is you need to get that deposit. And on that topic, Damo has some points.
Yeah, I think the one for me is shares are volatile and they can take up a bit of mental space. Obviously, depending on your mindset, if you're working, you've got a pretty busy and focused life, it can take up a lot of mental capacity trying to learn. So that's one thing I think that you need to consider. Are you the type of person that's going to check every morning or check every couple of hours? And it can also deter you. Let's say you get it wrong. You buy shares, for example, or some index funds that don't work out. It might even deter you from investing altogether. I don't think it would, but for some people, if you're having that dabble in, it potentially can. But I think, the time spent in learning can really potentially stall action. Like with that learning, maybe the share market, are you better off working a second job, earning that extra cash, putting it to a savings account and get that deposit a lot quicker? And you get stability in that surplus. And so that's just one thing. With property, obviously very heavily allocated to one market. So when you do purchase that first property, make sure that probability is really high. So look for things like high DSR3 scores, do your due diligence. And I think you don't have to be perfect. Like at the end of the day, you're not going to find that perfect property. I think we want to get in that, top 5, 10% of markets.
Top 1%.
Top 1%. I like to go for 5, but we'll go for 1. And then I think focus on surplus. That's my biggest takeaway. Like sit down and then, cut your expenses where you can. I mentioned another job. Sell that car. I've seen people buy these cars and they go, I want to go buy an investment property, but they've depleted all their cash reserves. So they've gone back, sold the car. So they've gone through all that headache to get this expensive car where it's just really hurt their cash buffers, where if they bought something a little bit cheaper and just focused on that property, I have seen people definitely turn that around. So it's really just putting that portfolio before your lifestyle. The lifestyle can wait. Again, everyone's circumstances are different, but I think you've been through that process where you've sacrificed to get into building the portfolio, as have I. So I think just try and simplify things wherever you can. All right. Conclusion. So shares equal what? Build capital and discipline.
I think that shares are for when you don't have enough money for a deposit for property, obviously, and they teach you a lot of valuable lessons painfully about preservation of capital, about volatility, about risk. And that's when you realise just how wonderful property investing is, because you don't have that stress. And also, I think it's a lot easier to understand the way in which buyers are interested in property and how property works, finance and property management and the drivers of capital growth, compared to what you have to learn to beat the fund managers in the share market. So for me, it's not a case of save for a deposit, it's a case of invest for a deposit. I would put money into an index fund.
I think the set and forget approach, again, from my experience, and you have to look at your own circumstances, but I think obviously asset allocation is really important. So like, let's say the share market's flying, you might want to adjust your share portfolio, maybe to take some cash out. So again, it's just whatever your game plan is. But I think shares can definitely build some discipline.
Cool.
Staying focused, and then I think, as you mentioned, the scaling is the big thing. But so next up is the Expert Busting episode 24, Rent Money is Dead Money. Thanks for watching.